Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. The soil samples from the Amazon expedition were finally showing promising results after 3 years of research. The rare Caladium sanguis I'd discovered deep in the rainforest contained compounds that could revolutionize how we fight aggressive infections. The plant was a botanical marvel, growing in striking patterns of emerald green, blood red, and deep indigo blue within the same specimen. These tri-colored variants were exceedingly rare, appearing only in a remote valley I'd spent months tracking down. I'd risked venomous snakes, tropical diseases, and hostile terrain to bring these specimens back to Philadelphia, convinced they held the key to a medical breakthrough. I was examining leaf cultures under the microscope at 7:32 a.m. when I finally looked up from my home lab setup. The crimson-veined leaves had kept me awake all night with their extraordinary properties. I was already late for my 8 a.m. meeting with Dr. Harrow at Lincoln Memorial Research Center to discuss my findings. The irony isn't lost on me. If I'd been punctual instead of obsessed with my plants, I'd probably be dead. I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed with the first emergency alert. Civil emergency in downtown area. Remain indoors. Avoid contact with agitated individuals. I'd worked through enough public health scares to know this wasn't standard protocol language. Something was different. I switched on the TV while gathering my things. Local news showed chaotic footage outside Mercy General, just 3 blocks from our research facility. The reporter's voice trembled as she described multiple violent incidents and patients attacking hospital staff. The camera panned to ambulances with doors hanging open, abandoned gurneys, and people running from the building. That's when I saw the first infected person on live television. A male nurse stumbled into frame, skin ashen, movements stiff and precise like a hunting predator. Blood leaked from his mouth, staining his scrubs dark crimson. The cameraman backed away, but not before capturing the nurse tackling a fleeing woman, sinking his teeth into her shoulder. The feed cut abruptly to the news studio, where anchors sat wide-eyed, speechless. My phone rang. It was Eliza from the lab, her voice tight with panic. "Don't come in, Mason. Something's happening. Doctor Kwan was bitten during morning rounds and he attacked Dr. Harrow. Security's locked down the floor, but..." A crash sounded in the background, followed by screams. "Oh God, they're coming through the doors. The guards are shooting, but they won't stop moving." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but the networks were already overwhelmed. 3 more emergency alerts hit my phone in rapid succession, each more urgent than the last. The final one didn't mince words. Unknown pathogen causing extreme violence. Avoid all contact with infected individuals. Bites spread contamination. My botanical research suddenly seemed vital. The Caladium sanguis had shown powerful antimicrobial properties in preliminary tests, with compounds that could inhibit aggressive pathogens. I grabbed my emergency bag and threw in basic medical supplies from my home kit, plus my research notes and several preserved leaf samples from my personal collection. I lived on the 9th floor of my apartment building, which suddenly seemed like a tactical advantage. Looking out my window, I could see the first signs of the city's unraveling. Cars speeding through intersections, a woman dragging her children toward the subway entrance, an elderly man being attacked by what had once been a civilian in business attire. The infected moved with purpose, each motion dedicated to a single objective: find, bite, spread. Their focus was chilling. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just the mechanical precision of a biological imperative. My neighbor Talia pounded on my door, her 6-year-old daughter Zoe clutching a stuffed rabbit. Blood streaked Talia's blouse. Not hers, she explained between gasping breaths. Her husband Owen had been attacked in the parking garage. He'd held the stairwell door shut while Talia and Zoe escaped, screaming for them to run as the infected overwhelmed him. "They were biting him," Zoe whispered, eyes wide with incomprehension. Daddy was yelling and the bad people were biting him. I brought them inside, bolting the door behind them. Talia was a veterinarian, another biological scientist, another potential asset. We needed to think strategically if we were going to survive. The power flickered as we gathered water bottles and non-perishables. Outside, sirens wailed continuously, punctuated by sporadic gunfire. Helicopters thumped overhead. Military or news crews, I couldn't tell. The city was dissolving into chaos faster than I could process. "We need to get out of the city," Talia said, her professional calm returning. "If this is spreading as fast as it seems, urban centers will be death traps." I agreed, but the streets below looked increasingly dangerous. Infected roamed in growing numbers, their bodies moving with that distinctive predatory rhythm. Some still wore the remnants of their former lives, business suits, hospital gowns, delivery uniforms, but all shared the same pallid skin and blood-smeared mouths. When my phone rang again, I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Theodore, my colleague from the Botanical Research Department. "Mason, where are you? Are you safe?" His voice was barely audible over what sounded like a helicopter engine. "At my apartment with neighbors. What's happening, Theo?" "The military's established a quarantine zone at Westfield Base. I'm there now. They're evacuating essential scientific personnel." The connection crackled. Listen carefully. CDC's preliminary analysis suggests a prion-like pathogen with elements similar to rabies. The infection rate is unlike anything they've seen. Mason, your research on the Caladium sanguis compounds. The military's asking for anyone with potential treatment avenues. If you can get here. The call dropped. I tried calling back, but phone service had finally collapsed completely. Talia looked at me, her expression grim. "You heard that? Westfield. That's 20 miles west. 20 miles through an infected city. The subway would be certain death, too enclosed. Too dark, too many places for the infected to hide. Driving meant navigating streets clogged with abandoned vehicles and desperate people." Soon after, we got our first close look at the infected. The maintenance man, Hugo, began pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I could see blood pouring from a wound on his neck, his skin already taking on that distinctive gray pallor. His movements were razor-focused, yet somehow disjointed, his limbs moving at impossible angles as though his muscles and tendons operated independently of bone structure. Each rotation of his head produced audible grinding as damaged vertebrae scraped against each other. "Is that Mr. Hugo?" Zoe asked, moving toward the door. Talia pulled her back as I braced myself against the entrance. "That's not Hugo anymore," I said quietly. "That's what happens when the infection takes over." The pounding continued for 7 minutes before Hugo shambled away, drawn by sounds elsewhere in the building. But now we knew the infection had reached our apartment building. Distant explosions and thickening smoke on the horizon marked the government's first attempts at containment. I scribbled notes in my journal, documenting symptoms and transmission patterns from what little we'd observed. If I made it to the Westfield evacuation point, every scrap of data would help. The building's fire alarm blared suddenly. The harsh sound would attract every infected for blocks. We had no choice but to leave now. The stairwell lights flickered as we descended cautiously, Talia carrying Zoe, me leading with a makeshift weapon, a kitchen knife duct taped to a broomstick. We could hear movement below, the scrape of feet on concrete, soft growling noises that weren't quite human anymore. At the 4th floor landing, we encountered our first group of infected, 3 residents I recognized but whose names I'd never learned. A young woman in yoga clothes, an older man still clutching his morning newspaper, and a teenage boy with headphones around his neck. Their eyes found us simultaneously, milky and vacant, yet somehow intensely focused. Their heads tilted in perfect unison, nostrils flaring as they caught our scent. The world narrowed to a single moment of crystalline clarity. I could hear Talia's breathing behind me, feel sweat trickling down my back, smell the coppery tang of blood on the infected. In the background, Philadelphia burned, sirens wailed, civilization collapsed. But in that stairwell, there was only us, them, and the space between. They rushed forward, moving with that horrible synchronized purpose that defied their decaying state. I raised my makeshift spear, knowing the next few seconds would determine whether we lived or died. I caught the first one in the eye socket. The second slammed into Talia, who fought with surprising strength, keeping its snapping teeth away from her flesh. The third lunged for Zoe, but I yanked it back by its shirt collar and drove my blade into its temple. Dark fluid sprayed across the concrete. "Run!" I shouted as the remaining infected struggled to its feet. We sprinted down the stairs, bursting into the parking garage where Talia's SUV waited. By some miracle, the keys were still in her pocket. We tore out of the garage into streets that had become a battleground. Military helicopters circled overhead, occasionally firing at dense clusters of infected. We navigated through a maze of abandoned vehicles, sometimes having to ram our way through. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts as we pushed westward. Military blockades had been established along major routes, turning back anyone showing symptoms. We approached one such checkpoint with trepidation, hands visible, voices steady as we explained who we were. "A botanist?" The soldier looked skeptical until I showed him my research credentials. Then his demeanor changed. "We've got orders to expedite scientific personnel. Follow the escort vehicle." A Humvee led us through the checkpoint and onto less congested roads. Talia kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the burning city behind us. "They're calling them zombies on the radio," she whispered, keeping her voice low so Zoe wouldn't hear. "Actual zombies, how is this happening?" I had no answer as we approached Westfield Military Base. The facility had transformed into a fortified scientific outpost in a matter of hours. Armed guards patrolled a perimeter marked by sandbags and barbed wire. Beyond the fences, makeshift labs had been erected in what must have been an incredible logistical feat. Theodore met us at the processing center. His lab coat wrinkled, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. "Mason, thank God." He embraced me briefly before turning to a clipboard. "We've got living quarters set up for civilians. Your neighbors will be safe here." As Talia and Zoe were led away to be examined by medical staff, Theodore gripped my arm. "Your plant compounds. The CDC's desperate for anything that might slow the infection. The military's preparing treatment protocols, but they need a viable agent." "My primary samples and cultures are still at the research center," I said, my stomach clenching as the full implications dawned on me. My mouth went dry, heart pounding against my ribs as I realized what we'd have to do. The most promising specimens, my complete research data, it's all there. Theodore's expression darkened. "The research district is heavily compromised. It's a hot zone now." A new voice joined our conversation. "That's why they've called us in." I turned to see a man in tactical gear, the insignia on his shoulder identifying him as Navy SEAL. Behind him stood 5 more operators, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. "Lieutenant Wade," he introduced himself. "My team has been assigned to get you back to your lab. I understand you have samples that might help with this situation?" I nodded, mind racing. The caladium sanguis compounds showed remarkable inhibitory effects against aggressive pathogens in preliminary tests. If I can retrieve my primary cultures and research data, then we move immediately, Wade decided. "Situation's deteriorating by the hour. This may be our only window before the entire city is overrun." As the SEAL team prepared for the extraction mission, I looked back at Philadelphia. The skyline I'd called home was partially obscured by smoke. Somewhere in that chaos was my laboratory, containing what might be humanity's best hope against the infection that was rapidly consuming the country. I'd spent years searching remote jungles for botanical compounds to fight disease. Now I had to return to an urban jungle that had become just as dangerous, if not more so. And this time, the fate of countless lives might depend on what we brought back. The SEAL team moved with methodical precision as we prepared to re-enter Philadelphia. Lieutenant Wade outlined our mission on a tactical map: a straightforward infiltration to the Lincoln Memorial Research Center, retrieval of my plant samples and research data, then immediate extraction. In theory, simple. In practice, with a city overrun by infected, potentially impossible. "We'll take 2 vehicles," Wade explained. "Heavy armored transport for the approach, then switch to something less conspicuous for the final leg." The infected are drawn to noise, so we maintain silence whenever possible. I studied the 6 operators who would be risking their lives for my research. Besides Wade, there was Rodriguez, the weapons specialist, Alvarez, communications, Fisher, their medic, Jenkins, demolitions, and Doyle, the team sniper. Each man moved with contained energy, checking equipment with practiced hands while maintaining situational awareness. What are our chances? Really? I asked Wade as the others prepared. His expression remained neutral. We've operated in hostile territory before. This is different, but the principles remain the same. Stay tight, move fast, complete the objective. He paused. Your plants. You're certain they could help? The preliminary tests showed remarkable inhibitory properties against aggressive pathogens, I replied. The Caladium sanguis produces unique alkaloid compounds that interrupt cellular binding mechanisms. If this infection works how I think it does, then it's worth the risk, Wade finished. Gear up, Dr. Reeves. We move in 20. Theodore embraced me before I boarded the transport. The cultures in Greenhouse 3 are the most promising, he reminded me. The refrigerated samples in Lab 4B contain the highest concentration of processed extract. I'll get them all if I can, I promised. The journey back into Philadelphia was a descent into hell. Military blockades had been established at major entry points, incinerating infected that approached in waves. Our credentials got us through, but the soldiers' expressions made clear they thought we were insane for going back in. Beyond the barricades, the city had transformed. Abandoned vehicles created maze-like obstacles on every street. Buildings burned unchecked, thick smoke reducing visibility to near zero in some areas. The infected wandered in packs, drawn to any movement or sound. Occasionally, we passed other survivors, barricaded in buildings or making desperate runs for supplies. It's spreading faster than anyone predicted, Alvarez murmured, monitoring emergency broadcasts. National Guards pulling back from downtown. CDC's reporting similar outbreaks in New York, Boston, D.C. Focus on the mission, Wade ordered. We can't help them all. We were forced to abandon the transport 5 blocks from the research center when the streets became impassable. The team shifted to foot movement, adopting a tight diamond formation with me protected in the center. Wade took point, Doyle covering our rear. We encountered our first major obstacle at Birch Street. A public bus had crashed into a department store, spilling dozens of infected onto the street. There was no way around. We'd have to go through. Suppressors on, Wade whispered. Headshots only. Conserve ammunition. I watched in horrified fascination as the team moved with synchronized precision. Each shot dropped an infected permanently, dark fluid splattering across the asphalt. The operators communicated with hand signals, covering sectors, advancing methodically. Movement, 2nd floor, Doyle warned. His rifle trained on the department store windows. Lots of movement. The glass shattered outward as infected poured from the building, drawn by our presence despite our efforts to remain quiet. There were too many, dozens, then what seemed like hundreds, a tide of gray flesh and grasping hands. Fall back to the alley, Wade shouted, abandoning stealth. Bottleneck them. We sprinted for the narrow passage between buildings, the infected closing in with that terrible, relentless focus. Jenkins tossed something behind us, a small explosive that detonated with a controlled blast, temporarily slowing the horde. The alley should have been our salvation. Instead, it nearly became our tomb. More infected poured from a side door halfway down the passage, cutting off our escape route. We were trapped between 2 groups, ammunition limited, options dwindling by the second. Fire escape! Rodriguez spotted the rusted metal ladder. Up now! We scrambled up the aging structure, metal groaning under our weight. I lost my footing on the 3rd landing, nearly falling back into the mass of reaching hands below. Fisher grabbed my arm, hauling me upward with strength born of desperation. The infected couldn't climb effectively, but they gathered below, an ever-growing mass of writhing bodies. Some began attempting to scale the walls, fingers breaking as they clawed at the brick. Roof access, Wade confirmed, kicking open a door. We'll cross to the next building. Find another way down. The rooftops offered a momentary reprieve and a horrifying view of Philadelphia's rapid collapse. Fires had spread through entire districts. Military helicopters circled downtown, occasionally firing into dense clusters of infected. In the distance, what looked like artillery strikes hit the northern reaches of the city. "They're bombing parts of the city," Doyle said quietly, trying to create fire breaks to slow the spread. The research center was visible 3 blocks away, its modern glass architecture still intact amid the chaos. We traversed 2 more rooftops before finding a fire escape that would take us back to street level. The descent was tense, each metal clang potentially attracting more infected. At the bottom, Alvarez took point, leading us through a service alley toward the research center's rear entrance. We were a block away when disaster struck. A pack of infected emerged from a loading dock, moving with that distinctive predatory grace that still chilled me to witness. Jenkins, who had fallen slightly behind to cover our rear, didn't see them in time. The first infected tackled him from behind, teeth sinking into his neck before anyone could react. His scream cut through the air, drawing more of them. "Jenkins!" Fisher turned back, raising his weapon. "No!" Wade grabbed his arm. "He's gone! We move! Now!" The infected swarmed Jenkins, his screams transforming to gurgling as they tore into him. Couldn't look away, even as Rodriguez pulled me forward. Jenkins had been joking about his daughter's upcoming birthday just hours earlier. Now he was gone, consumed by the horror we'd come to fight. We reached the research center's perimeter fence, cutting through the chain link with specialized tools. The botanical gardens where I'd cultivated my specimens were visible through the glass walls of the main atrium. So were the dozens of infected inside, researchers, security personnel, maintenance staff, all transformed into mindless predators. "How do we get through that?" I whispered as we observed from cover. Wade studied the building's layout. "Service tunnels. Most research facilities have maintenance access for climate control systems, especially for botanical work. Where are they?" I pulled up mental blueprints of the facility. Southwest corner near the loading docks. There's a ventilation system for the greenhouses that connects to the main building. The tunnels were mercifully clear, though signs of violence marked the walls. Blood smears, bullet holes, abandoned equipment. We moved in silence, weapons ready, until we reached the access point to Greenhouse 3. "This is it," I whispered. "My primary specimens are through there, along with the processing lab where we extracted the compounds." Wade assessed the situation through the small window in the access door. "I count 8 infected in the main greenhouse chamber. Can't see the lab from here." "We need a distraction," Rodriguez suggested. "Draw them away from the samples." Fisher volunteered to set up a noise generator in the opposite corner of the facility, while he departed with Alvarez for backup. The rest of us prepared to enter the greenhouse. The greenhouse complex was a sprawling cathedral of glass and steel, designed to house thousands of plant specimens in carefully controlled microclimates. Under normal circumstances, it was my sanctuary, a place of scientific discovery and botanical wonder. Now it had become a hunting ground for the infected. I guided Wade and Doyle through the maze of vegetation, staying low beneath the canopy of experimental cultivars. The air was thick with humidity and the rich scent of soil and organic matter. Water still dripped from the automated misting systems, creating a gentle background patter that helped mask our footsteps. "There," I pointed to a specialized growing chamber separated from the main greenhouse. "That's where I keep the Caladium sanguis cultures." The isolation chamber was secured with a biometric lock, one of the few systems still operational thanks to backup power. My fingerprint granted us access to a climate-controlled room filled with rows of the tri-colored plants. Their beauty was even more striking amid the chaos. Emerald leaves veined with crimson and indigo, almost pulsing with life under the grow lights. "These are the primary specimens," I explained, carefully selecting the most robust samples. "The genetic expression is strongest in these variants. Each plant contains different alkaloid concentrations depending on growth conditions." Wade kept watch at the door while I gathered samples, securing them in specialized containers designed to maintain optimal conditions. The plants were delicate, requiring precise handling to preserve their medicinal properties. Processing lab is through the north corridor, I told them. That's where we store the extracted compounds and research data. As if on cue, the distant sound of an alarm echoed through the building. Fisher and Alvarez had activated the distraction. The infected in the main greenhouse chamber immediately reacted, their heads swiveling in unison toward the noise before they shambled away from our position. "Now's our window," Wade said. "Move." We slipped from the isolation chamber into the main greenhouse, navigating between tall palms and dense ferns. The processing lab was visible through the reinforced glass walls at the far end, a sterile counterpoint to the lush vegetation surrounding it. The corridor connecting the greenhouse to the lab was a gauntlet of danger. 2 infected researchers lurched from an alcove, nostrils flaring as they detected our presence. Doyle took them down with mechanical precision, suppressed rounds finding their targets with minimal noise. "More coming," Wade warned, spotting movement ahead. "Doc, is there another way in?" I scanned our surroundings, mind racing. The specimen transfer port. It's a specialized airlock for moving samples between environments without contamination. The transfer system was designed for plant material, not humans, but it was our best option. We backtracked to a maintenance panel where I could access the controls. "This will trigger alarms," I warned as I overrode the safety protocols. "Do it," Wade decided. "Our distraction won't last much longer anyway." The alarms blared as the transfer port's outer doors slid open, revealing a narrow passage barely large enough for us to crawl through. We entered in sequence, me first to guide the way, then Doyle, with Wade covering our rear. The antiseptic interior of the processing lab was a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the greenhouse. Gleaming steel workstations housed sophisticated extraction equipment, centrifuges, and spectroscopic analyzers. Refrigeration units lined the walls, storing various compounds at precisely regulated temperatures. "We need the samples from storage unit B4, I directed, moving to a keypad-secured refrigerator, and the research data is on the secure servers. As I gathered vials of concentrated plant extract, Doyle accessed the computer systems. Downloading my research onto portable drives, Wade maintained a vigilant watch at the lab's entrance, where infected had begun to gather, drawn by the alarms. "How much longer?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. "Almost done," I replied, carefully packing the last of the critical samples. "These extracts represent months of refinement. Without them, we'd have to start the process from scratch." The radio crackled with Fisher's voice. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation. Southeast entrance is compromised, multiple infected converging on our position. Fall back to extraction point Alpha," Wade ordered. "We'll meet you there." "Sir?" Fisher's voice was strained. "Alvarez is hit, bitten on the shoulder, and I've taken a bite to the arm." Wade's expression hardened. "Can you move?" "Affirmative. We'll make rendezvous." The infected outside the lab had grown more agitated, pounding against the reinforced glass with increasing force. Hairline fractures began to appear in the barrier. "That glass won't hold," Doyle observed, pocketing the data drives. "We need an exit strategy." I studied the lab's layout. Emergency decontamination shower. It connects to the hazardous materials disposal system, which leads to the exterior waste management area. It was a tight fit, a passage designed for chemical runoff, not human escape. We crawled through damp, narrow confines as the sounds of shattering glass and infected growls filled the lab behind us. The passage opened to a concrete channel outside the building, where specialized waste containers were stored. Fisher and Alvarez were waiting at the rendezvous point, both men pale but mobile. Alvarez's wound was severe. The bite on his shoulder had torn through muscle, exposing bone. The skin around the injury already showed the ashen pallor of advancing infection. Fisher's arm bite seemed more recent, the blood still flowing freely. "Let me see those," I said, examining their wounds as Wade secured our perimeter. "Am I going to turn into one of those things?" Fisher asked quietly, his medical training giving him a clinical understanding of his situation. "The infection spreads through the bloodstream," I replied, "but I might be able to help." I reached into my pack for the plant extracts. These compounds have shown inhibitory effects against aggressive pathogens in lab tests. It's not proven, but... "I'll take those odds," Fisher said, rolling up his sleeve to expose the bite wound. Using my limited field supplies, I prepared a basic solution of the plant extract and applied it directly to both men's wounds. Then I prepared syringes with the more concentrated extract. "This might help slow the spread through your system," I explained, injecting the solution near their bite sites. "I wish I could tell you this will work, but you're the first human test subjects." The extraction point was 2 blocks away, a small clearing where our helicopter would attempt landing. Getting there meant navigating streets filled with infected, our team now hampered by 2 injured members. We moved as quickly as possible, Wade and Doyle taking the lead while I helped support Alvarez, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. His skin burned with fever, muscles spasming intermittently as the infection progressed. Fisher, despite his injury, remained more stable. The wound on his arm had stopped bleeding, the skin around it showing less of the characteristic gray pallor. It might have been wishful thinking, but the plant extract seemed to be having some effect on his condition. 3 blocks from extraction, Alvarez collapsed. His breathing became ragged, pupils dilating as he stared at something none of us could see. "We need to move," Wade urged, checking his watch. "Extraction window is closing." "I can't leave him," Fisher insisted, his medical training overriding self-preservation. Alvarez seized Fisher's arm, his grip unnaturally strong. "Go!" he rasped, still fighting for control of his mind. "Tell my mother. Tell her I wasn't afraid." His eyes rolled back as another seizure racked his body. When they opened again, something fundamental had changed. The awareness, the humanity that made Alvarez who he was, had vanished. In its place was the same primal hunger we'd seen in all the infected. Wade didn't hesitate. A single suppressed shot, and Alvarez was at peace. The helicopter was already descending as we reached the extraction point, rotors whipping debris across the small clearing. We climbed aboard, Fisher's condition now our primary concern. His fever had stabilized, the infection seemingly progressing more slowly than we'd observed in other cases. "How do you feel?" I asked him as the helicopter lifted off. "Strange," he admitted. "My arm burns, but my head's still clear. Whatever you did, I think it's working." From the air, Philadelphia looked like a war zone. Fires burned unchecked across entire districts. Military vehicles formed defensive perimeters around critical infrastructure. The streets teemed with infected, their numbers growing by the minute. We landed at Westfield Base as the sun began to set. Less than 12 hours had passed since the first emergency alerts, yet the world had transformed completely. Fisher was immediately taken to a quarantine facility for observation, while I rushed my precious cargo of plant samples to the makeshift laboratory. Theodore and the remaining scientists converged on the lab, eager to see what we'd recovered. I carefully unpacked the plant specimens, explaining their unique properties as I set up the extraction equipment. The Caladium sanguis produces 3 primary alkaloid compounds, I explained, preparing slides for analysis. Each interacts differently with cellular binding sites. Our preliminary tests indicated strong inhibitory effects against aggressive pathogens. "And you've already administered some to the infected soldier?" Theodore asked, examining the preserved samples. "Direct application to the wound site followed by localized injection," I confirmed. "He's showing significantly slower progression than typical cases. The soldier bitten on the shoulder, Alvarez, was too far gone for the treatment to help, but Fisher's arm bite is responding differently." We worked frantically, analyzing the compounds, preparing more refined extracts for testing. The military provided additional resources, advanced equipment, specialist personnel, priority access to research data from other facilities studying the infection. As midnight approached, I finally had a moment to check on Fisher. The quarantine facility had been set up in what was formerly a barracks, now converted with observation windows and medical monitoring equipment. Fisher sat on the edge of his bed, pale but alert. The bite on his arm had been carefully bandaged after multiple applications of the plant extract. Monitoring equipment tracked his vital signs, which remained remarkably stable given the circumstances. "Doc," he greeted me with a weak smile. "Your plant cocktail doing its job." "The infection is still present in your system," I explained, reviewing his charts. "But the progression has slowed dramatically. Your immune response is stronger than we've seen in other cases, and the plant compounds appear to be inhibiting the pathogen's spread. So I'm not going to turn?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "I don't know." I had to be honest. "This is completely new territory, but you've already outlasted the typical conversion timeframe. That's significant." Lieutenant Wade joined us, standing at the observation window. "What are we looking at here, Doc? A cure?" "Not a cure," I clarified. "At least not yet. The compounds are interrupting the infection's biological mechanisms, slowing its progress. Fisher's case suggests there's a window after infection where the plant extract can be effective, perhaps preventing full conversion if administered quickly enough." "How quickly?" Wade asked. "Based on Alvarez versus Fisher? I'd guess the critical period is within an hour of infection. After that, the pathogen establishes too strong a foothold in the central nervous system." Wade considered this information. "So we can't save the already infected, but we might be able to save those recently bitten." "Exactly. It's a small window, but it's something. With more research, we might expand that window or increase effectiveness." Less than 12 hours after the first reports of infection, we had found our first glimmer of hope. Not a cure, not a solution to the nightmare unfolding across the country, but a potential weapon in the fight. The plant I'd spent years studying in remote jungles might help humanity hold the line against an enemy we were only beginning to understand. As I returned to the lab to continue my work, I thought about Alvarez and Jenkins, their sacrifices making this small victory possible. I thought about all the others still out there, fighting to survive in a world that had changed forever in less than a day. The full potential of the Caladium sanguis remained uncertain. Would it simply buy time for the infected, or could it eventually lead to complete recovery? Could we develop preventative treatments, improve efficacy against established infections? The questions were endless, the research just beginning. But for the first time since morning, when I'd watched Philadelphia descend into chaos, I felt something besides terror, a cautious sense of purpose. A reminder that even in our darkest hours, human ingenuity and determination could find a path forward. Outside the laboratory windows, night had fallen on the first day of a changed world. The work ahead would be challenging beyond imagination, but we had found a thread of hope, however thin, a promising treatment born from a tri-colored plant that grew half a world away. Sometimes the most unexpected discoveries become our most vital lifelines. As Fisher rested in quarantine, his condition stable but uncertain, I returned to my microscope. The crimson and indigo veins of the Caladium sanguis seemed to pulse under the lens, their secret still only partially revealed. The race against time continued, with countless lives hanging in the balance.